We're going to start off with a confession this morning, and you can confess with me if you want, if you're bold enough. Have you ever gone somewhere and done something, and you're like, "This is my happy place"? Maybe you've even posted it on Facebook, "At my happy place." Anybody ever done that? Come on, okay. For those of you who didn't raise your hand, maybe you've thought that, or you've gone on vacation, and you're like, "Man, I can't believe we have to get back to reality tomorrow." As if like there's this barrier we've created between, I just have to get through my normal life so I can go to this place that's just so much better. For some people, you don't have to go that far. Maybe your happy place is your garage you tinker with, or some place you have around. But there's often times where we think, man, if this could just last longer, right? This time I have could just last longer, be better. Hobby Lobby's even made a living off selling signs like this. Like, the beach is my happy place. You could go on, you can Google all these signs, and maybe some of us in the room are suckers and we bought them. And I'm just joking. If you have one, it's cool. But let's be honest. In our mind, though, we create these categories of, okay, this is good life. These other parts of life are not so good. And, there's times where it's like, man, I can just kick back and I don't have to be facing the things I have to face in life. But the psalmist doesn't see it, though, that way. He sees that life is a continual thing all the time. And it's not supposed to paint these things of like separating our Christian life from our regular life, or separating whether times are good or times are bad, or the beach is my happy place and I have to get back to work next week. It's life. And in the midst of life, he says, and we've gone over the last couple weeks, the Lord is my shepherd. When we've talked about what that meant is the Lord is our shepherd and Jesus as our shepherd. And last week we looked at this idea. Because of that, we should be satisfied, because we are perfectly cared for by the shepherd, and then therefore our soul does not have to crave for anything else. We don't need to go somewhere else for satisfaction in life other than Jesus himself. Right? But even like my happy place sometimes deep down points to that this is just really better than this other part of my life I have to live. But as we're going to see where the psalmist wants to bring us this morning, we're going to see how this 23rd psalm is supposed to be a lifestyle, something we continually live, not something we look forward to when times are tough, or like I have on my calendar. I already have something this summer I have planned that I've been looking forward to, that I wish the week feels like it's 6 months. Right? But he's saying, no, this is the life you're called to as a follower of Jesus. And he says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Again, he's using the analogy as us as sheep, and God, or as we now know, Jesus is the good shepherd. And so we need to continue to look at these analogies that he's painting here between a sheep and a shepherd to truly come to grips with what he's saying. So as we start here with, he makes me lie down in green pastures, did you know that sheep need 4 things to lay down? We talked about one last week, in being fully satisfied after they eat. But here's 4. Number 1, free of fear. Number 2, free of relational friction. So sheep are very highly relational, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. Free of pests, right? The parasites and the little fleas and ticks or whatever else they have in other parts of the world, they'll burrow themselves. And when they're burrowed, they can't lay down. Free of hunger as well. So when sheep aren't fully satisfied from their meals, they may not lay down. They may continue to stand up. They're very, they're simple creatures. They can be shaken really easy. So he says 4 things need to have happen here. Let's look at them this way. Let's look at them as people now. To lay down in green pastures, free of fear of worry, fear, and anxiety. It's hard to rest in our life if we're constantly in fear of something, we're constantly worrying about something, and we're living in a state of anxiety. It's hard to rest. Hard just to, right? He says lay down. This is a restful picture he's getting at here. It's hard to. If you're constantly an anxious person, it is hard to lay down, hard to rest. When you have relational tension happening, it's hard to rest. Sometimes we're the cause of the relational tension. Other times we're caught in the middle of it. Other times we have nothing we can do about it. Relational tension is tough, and relational tension can be one of the reasons why we have worry and anxiety in our lives. But it can easily take place. Free of nagging affliction. I'm trying to picture this picture of like we're just uneasy. Our soul is not at rest, and little things set us off. Right? I can look back to this past week of 3 or 4 things that I'm like, man, that's just a nagging affliction that keep on coming up, that I'm like, why does this have to happen? Why has it got to be that way? But that easily can take our soul, and it can shake us until we're not in a state of contentment with Christ. We're frazzled. We're all over the place. If you're high and low all the time in who you are, it's easy to have these things that just keep on nagging at us. Or we bottle it all up until we explode. Lastly, free of physical need. Now, in our culture, the hunger one doesn't pertain as much. In some parts of the world, it might. But let's throw this idea of physical need. Maybe there's need you have in your life. Right? There's other need you might have, whether it's physical as in your health, physical as in a car not working right, that you have to pay a big bill on. Right? It's hard to rest and be in relaxation, the psalmist would say, when these things are happening. Now, that doesn't mean you can't lay down and watch a Netflix show and you think, I've rested. He means in your soul, deep inside of your soul, you are at rest. It's good. And these are 4 reasons why. Now, let's go back to the idea of these 4 and the shepherd. In the first case, the free of fear, there is a story of a man who would actually lay out in his fields at night with his sheep. And he had found that when he laid in his field at nighttime, the sheep would be a lot more at ease, and they would relax easier and lay down quicker when he was out there. A couple nights he wasn't out there, and a coyote came close, and the sheep were spooked, and they began running, and he said that it was nights before they could lay down again, but it was when he would go out there to be with them and lay down, the sheep were a lot more at ease, and they would lay down quicker. The relational tension. Did you know sometimes sheep, they can be rude to one another. They can be mean to one another. They can run over each other. Some sheep, it says they might stiffen up, arch their back, and they might find a spot that they like that another sheep is in, and they might push him around. And if the other sheep doesn't move, they'll keep headbutting that sheep until maybe blood is drawn or the sheep finally moves. And if flocks of sheep are not in good relationship to one another, they become edgy, discontented, irritable. They may lose weight, and that might also be a reason why they don't eat. But this same shepherd said every time he would walk out into their field and he would know that there would be relational tension happening, every time he'd walk out, the sheep's attention would focus more on the shepherd and not on the relational issues that were happening. They were wired to be focused on the shepherd's presence, and that would take all this other stuff, even though it might be there, but their focus would be taken off of it. The other amazing thing that the shepherd would do is the shepherd would constantly comb through the sheep to make sure it was free of parasites, free of the little nagging insects that would afflict them. And he found the better he took care of the coat they had, shearing them and taking care of that, the more they were at ease to lay down and find peace and rest. And lastly, every time the shepherd comes out, they come running because they think it's time to eat. All right, they think it's time to eat, and they come running to the shepherd. But once they are satisfied with their meal, and they know they have a shepherd who feeds them, they are more at ease to lie down. Now, in the midst of life, let's be honest, the fear, worry, anxiety, the relational tensions we carry, the nagging afflictions, and the physical needs, those are a normal part of life. You may be able to go to your happy place, but they may not disappear. They're still going to be there. And this is what the psalmist is saying, that he makes me lie down in green pastures, that as our lives are just lived, We are called to be like this sheep, that we constantly have our eyes on the shepherd, and we grow in the shepherd's presence in our life. Let's look at it this way. Yes, my slide's working. But I know with having little kids and even being a little kid myself, I used to hate when the lights would go out. And even now, it's like that countdown, right? The lights go out, right? Some storm happens, something happens, and you're like, all right, 30 seconds till the first kid's in here, right? Oh, why are the lights out? And they're scared. And so a lot of times with my kids, we'll go downstairs and we'll sleep in the living room. And it's often that they look at me 3 or 4 times before they can go to sleep, but it's because I'm with them now, even though the lights are out. The lights are still out, but it's because I'm there, they can sleep. And this is what he's sharing with us, that, listen, in life we're going to have worry and anxiety that may rise up in us. Some of that's good, some of it might be bad. We're going to have relational tensions. We're going to have nagging afflictions that nag us. We're going to have physical need in our life, but those things should not throw us off the edge. They should bring us into a deeper sense of knowing Jesus and being able to rest. Even though they're still happening, we can still rest. It's like my kids with the lights off. The lights are still off, but now they can go to sleep because I'm in their presence, and usually I'm just as scared as they are. They don't know that. But they can. Nothing has changed. And this is what he's showing us, that sometimes there's a lot in our life we can't control. But the things we can't control, usually we let just drive our soul crazy. Yes, he does take care of some of these things for us, but even in the midst of these things, he says we can lie down in green pastures. Philip Keller, in his book, A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23, says this: in the midst of our misfortunes, there suddenly comes the awareness that he, the Christ, the good shepherd, is there. It makes all the difference. His presence in the picture throws a different light on the whole scene. Suddenly, things are not half as black nor nearly so terrifying. The outlook changes, and there is hope. I find myself delivered from, fill in the blank for yourself this morning, and rest returns, and I can relax. The walk with Jesus is meant to be that even in the midst of the hard things of life, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of getting the kids ready for the week, in the midst of retirement, in the midst of your new stage of life, that because the great shepherd walks alongside of us, that we can have rest in our soul, no matter what we're facing. But how do we do that? Well, we keep our eyes on the great shepherd, and we grow in constant awareness of his presence in our lives. You see, the interesting thing is, when we see he makes me lie down in green pastures, in our mind it comes a little bit easier, because I can go take a drive up north and get into Lee, right? And that's all there is like green fields, and it doesn't even seem like much work has to be done, right? Or if I let my backyard go, I'll have a green forest in a couple of months in the summer. But when David is actually writing in such a place that David was a shepherd himself, and he wrote in a place that was a dry, arid, burned wasteland, and it took a lot of work for him to have green pastures for his sheep. He actually had to get his hands dirty. He had to dig up the soil. He had to remove rocks. He may have to put special soil in. There might even be special seeds. And he would prep and prep and prep so his sheep could have green pastures. Oftentimes we think, God, where are you? He says, I'm right here. Even in the midst of all these things, this is the amazing picture of the gospel, that I can still give you green pastures to lay down in the midst of all these things that you face. That no matter what's going on, as we looked at last week, I can have contentment and I can have rest in my soul. I can have that. I want to take a little TV time out real quick as we transition to our next part of verse 2, because here's the deal. You're never going to achieve this with Jesus if you're in control of your life. You need to relinquish control of your life to have contentment and rest on the inside of you. Or you're always going to find yourself angry. You're always going to find yourself wound up. You're always going to find yourself looking at things in a bleak manner. if you are in control of your situation. And oftentimes, we don't ever find the greenest pastures that God intends for us because we do not want to give up the control in our life to control our Christian life or just control our life, period. We think our happy place may be able to do with it, right? And then we get back to reality and find that nothing changes because it's the lifestyle of keeping our eyes on Jesus and growing in his awareness. He says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside now still waters. You see, all of us, we're going to see how these connect here in a minute, but you see, all of us, we all have a thirst that needs to be quenched inside of our lives. We all do. We talked about some of that last week, right? We talked about the things we chase in life to satisfy now that soul, that we satisfy our soul, and that things we carry. We often may run to other things other than Jesus. But did you know sheep are made up of 70% water and are in great need of water? And sheep usually feed in the early morning or by the moonlight in the early morning. And that is typically, check this out, this is such a cool thing, that typically a lot of times the way they drink is the dew off the green pastures. Think about that for a moment. The way they drink is the dew. And so if we don't ever allow him to lie us down in green pastures, if we're controlling our life, if we don't say, Lord, I need to find your rest and contentment, you're never going to have your soul truly satisfied, quenched, because we're not partaking of the green pastures that he gives us. And so this is what happened. When sheep do it, they usually go find some dirty watering hole when they can't find water. And they get parasites, they get diseases, because they weren't willing to either trust or wait for the shepherd. The shepherd, in this case, in an earthly sense, the earthly shepherd did not take care of them. And this is what we often do as people, right? We said here, the Lord is my shepherd, right? That's a statement of what we believe to be true about God. And because of that, if you truly believe the Lord is my shepherd, you shall not want. You should not be in a place of seeking something else over him for satisfaction. You don't have a need for satisfaction. And because you're satisfied with him, you can find rest in your soul. But if you haven't done those things, you're going to continue to go and look for satisfaction to be quenched, your soul to be quenched, to be made right in other places. Check this out from Jeremiah 2, verse 13. He says this, "For my people have done two evil things. They have abandoned me, the fountain of living water, and they have dug for themselves cracked cisterns that hold no water at all." We as people, all the time, look for things outside of Jesus to quench the soul we have. And we think that these things that we quench are just simply going to take care of the anxiety, they're going to take care of the fears, they're going to take care of the relational issues, they're going to take care of the nagging afflictions, and they're going to take care of the physical needs, but in reality they don't, and so we keep on digging ourselves what we can call deeper holes or deeper wells that are cracked. And the things that we find satisfaction in are just cracked, and there's no satisfaction. And for followers of Jesus Christ, it's almost a worse thing, right? Because if people who don't claim to follow Jesus are looking for satisfaction in things, that should be expected. But as for followers of Jesus Christ, if we're ultimately deep down looking for other things to satisfy us other than Jesus, that's like the biggest hypocritical thing of all time, right? Because we should have the source of life right there. And so where do you go to satisfy your thirst in life? Thirst as in your soul. Where do you go? What is it that you do? Right? Recharge. Where do you go? Is it your happy place? But what the psalmist is trying to get us to see here is this. The happy place isn't a location. The happy place is a person. And it's someone who we constantly spend our time with. I'm not saying don't go on vacation. I'm not saying don't go to places you love. Hear me out. I'm all about those things. However, though, those were never intended to be the place of Jesus in our life. Jesus says this in John chapter 4 at the woman of the well. He meets a woman who's in need of a Savior, And he says this to the woman. He says, anyone who drinks this water will soon become thirsty again, but those who drink the water I will give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. Please, sir, the woman said, give me this water. Then I'll never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water. The psalmist is saying our thirsty souls can only be satisfied by Jesus. How do we do that? How do we do that then? Well, it comes down to, again, our eyes looking at the shepherd, our lives growing in his presence in our lives. And so as people, we need to have regular rhythms of spending time at the well with Jesus. What does that mean? What's that look like? Well, let's take our verses that we've been bringing in each week, we've been adding to kind of bring us more home on all this. In John chapter 10, Jesus again calls himself the shepherd. And he says, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. So first off, we see here Jesus' purpose for us is to give us a rich and satisfying life. No, that does not mean monetary wealth. He's talking our soul. That our soul can be rich and satisfied. He says, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. Just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father, so I sacrifice my life for the sheep. And then he says this later on in a couple of verses. He says, my sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Quiet waters come when we wait in silence to hear his voice. Refreshing of our soul, the rest of our soul, the contentment of our soul comes from spending time with Jesus and hearing his voice. You see, but oftentimes, and I'm just as guilty, we usually do this. We usually spend more time doing for God than we spend time being with him. That might even mean your devotional. You do devotionals, but it's a checkbox because I've done it for God, right? You serve for God, or I come to church for God. Doing comes out of our being. Spending time with Jesus. Right? Maybe we're here this morning because it's the checkbox in our life. Or we're here for a certain format or ritual to be fulfilled for me to be satisfied, when ultimately it's the person of Jesus you need to have an encounter with. So how do we do that again? Well, it's spending time with Jesus to be in his presence, to hear his voice. This might sound okay, this is kind of cliche, but no, truly. What we often do is we read the Bible real quick, or we don't. Right? Or we don't even spend time, right? The last time you spent time hearing about Jesus was last week, last Sunday. Having regular rhythms in our life. I'm not going to tell you when that is. That's for you and the Jesus to figure out. But reading your Bible. And I'm saying hearing his voice for yourself. Don't hear it through secondhand. What I mean by that is, don't just read a bunch of other devotionals and think I've done that. Sit with Jesus yourself. Begin to cultivate hearing his voice in your life for yourself. It might sound like a foreign concept in some ways, but it can be done. And if maybe there's something like, I want to know more about that, then get with someone in the church who you may think knows more about that. I'm not saying do your devotionals. I'm not saying read the Bible. I'm saying hear his voice. Yes, it's going to be part of Bible reading. It's going to be part of devotional life somewhat. But cultivating hearing Jesus' voice in your life. That's how he leads you to still waters in our lives. Is by hearing his voice, spending time in his presence. But if you're like me, sometimes I got to get it through, right? 5 minutes, done, right? Or I pray, but I'm like, all right, here's my list. And I just list off all these things I want from him. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying listen to him. What if you had no agenda when you went to be with Jesus? What if you just said, here I am. Bring rest, contentment. Let me hear from you this morning. That is the place we need to be in life. So we don't have to wait till the next thing to recharge, because I'm recharging with Jesus all the time, a lifestyle that I live. So here we pieced last week and this week together. Contentment and rest come by keeping our eyes on Jesus, by spending time in his presence. How do we keep our eyes on the shepherd? We spend time in his presence. And again, it's not a checkbox. It's not like I did it for 5 minutes in the morning. It's a continual thing. There's a book I have. It's called The Daily Office, and it's about spending time in 5 minutes of quiet in the morning, 5 minutes of quiet in the middle of the day, 5 minutes of quiet at night. Do I do it? Heck no. It's sitting in my office somewhere. But it's hard to be able to cultivate that in our life, to say, I'm just going to sit still right now, Jesus, and I want you to speak into my life. Yes, the Bible is a great way that God speaks to us, and we need to be in the Word. But we need to be hearing his voice for ourselves, not through other people. What I'm saying is this: a sermon on a Sunday morning that I share or somebody else shares, that's not enough. You're hearing God's voice, but don't hear my voice. And don't be that's the only voice you hear of your time with Jesus. Cultivate that in your own life. That's what the Christian life is about. An intimacy with Jesus, that we walk with him in such a deep way that no matter what happens, we can have rest and contentment in our life, because ultimately he leads us to quiet places to spend time with him, which is the outflow of the rest of our life. And if you need help developing that, talk with someone, talk with me. But ultimately, this week, here's what I'm asking: that you create rhythms of silence and listening and being with Jesus, simply. Do it. I remember in my master's class, the assignment was you had to go off for 8 hours with just a journal and a Bible, no phone, nothing, and just spend time listening. It changes you. It changes you in ways where we're not just trying to accomplish something or get something done or check something off, or I'm here to learn something. It's actually spending time with the living God himself, because he wants to speak with you, talk with you. And out of that comes these still waters and green pastures and a life that says, I shall not want, because I have everything I need in life. And that ultimately is the happy place, a lifestyle of walking with Jesus. So this week, create rhythms of that in your life. Begin. It's hard, because if you're like me, within 2 minutes, my mind is going to all sorts of things that have to happen this week. But it's hard to say, here I am, speak to me.